Good day, everyone. I am here in front of you together with my groupmates to tell you what we learned about in section number 3 and section number 4 in the article entitled The Development of Public Finance Institutions Created by Brilliance. So, in this section, especially in section number 3, my assigned topic, I will talk to you about capitalism, public finance, and free enterprise and how it affected today's economy. So, when we talk about capitalism, what immediately enters in our mind is the concept of profit or how to attain profit in this system or in the economy. So, in capitalism, the relationship here is that of the capitalists or the entrepreneurs and the people or the society in itself. Why? Because the entrepreneurs, the capitalists, are the ones who are going to produce the items or the products that are in demand in the society, and the society will thereafter of course purchase said demands, said supplies that will eventually benefit the enterprise or the capitalist, the entrepreneurs themselves, through the gesture of profit. So that is how I understood capitalism. So capitalism, it is a gradually building subject that eventually met a blast of impact during the industrial period in not just in Europe but as well as in other parts of the world. So when capitalism came, and connection with the industrial age there is that during the industrial age, the creation of machinery, factories, and any sort of equipment that aided in the production of supply had gravely aided in the increase of capitalist individuals in the society. So, with that in thought, since it is also inevitable that the population may rise during a specific period of time, through the period, through the industrialized concept of production, um, these products or the supply need of demand has eventually increased as well. So this results to the fact that the more supply that the capitalist or the entrepreneurs may produce, the more profit they may eventually get or they may eventually benefit from said supply. So for example, in a concept of providing a demand of canned goods from these people, since that's what they wanted, that's what they needed in the economy, in their lives. The entrepreneurs tasked to produce this canned goods may produce a lot, and those number of canned goods when purchased will eventually result to a particular amount which they will benefit from. So that's how I understood capitalism. So when you enter supermarkets or malls, eventually take a pause in the middle of everything and just observe the ongoing process, the purchasing, restocking, the checking out of said items, you will eventually see how capitalism is deeply embedded in our daily routines, in our daily lives, and of course in the systems which we operate in every single day. So, with that in mind, the concept of capitalism eventually changed the trajectory of the economy. So, back then, it was usually the economy isn't as greater as it is nowadays. So it kind of like had a great impact with how our economy or the economy nowadays eventually boosted in itself and its production, how it eventually made everything to have to be provided by for the people, and then the people will eventually use these means to for their daily needs. But again, through the purchases of these products, the entrepreneurs will eventually benefit from it as well. So, in this concept, the laissez-faire policy is actually manifested, or it was created, because back then in the mercantilist theory, the government actually has a hand in how the system should work. So every single notion, every single instance made by business enterprises back then have always been something that is subjected under the government supervision. But in this case, in this particular section, the laissez-faire, or what we known as, or directly translates to let people be or let be, eventually allows for these enterprises to work on their own with little to no meddling from the government, because in this concept the government is only only that which should focus on its primary objective, which is public work. Public work in order to serve its people. Whereas the enterprises will be the one, or the one in the entrepreneurs, the business sector, let's name it as such, will be the one who will prioritize the demand and supply part of our daily transaction and living. So with that in mind, the entrepreneurs, or the capitalism in itself, heavily relies on production and supply. Production, demand, and supply. So with what is demanded, that is to which will be produced, and what will be produced will be the supply, and vice versa. And then that eventually results to, yes, as I mentioned a while ago, income. So in this, um, it is stipulated that the government should have little to no interference, as I've mentioned, because back then, and especially in mercantilist theory, the government actually has a hand in, in the system of economy, and especially in business. But in this concept, the government sector is only required to work and should be limited to the basics, which is to protect the maintenance of the bureaucracy, to provide public work and serve the public, and to give the services in need from the government towards the population, or towards the community. So with capitalism, it actually became the birth, or the reason why a lot of classist economists have eventually started to gain, or to write theories about the economy and how it works. And that will be discussed by my next group mate. And I hope that you would stay tuned to that discussion, because they will be the ones who will eventually lay down the roots of how the process actually works, how each economist eventually understood the cost for economics in this system, and how it affects the government and the sectors to which economy, the sectors under the concept of economy.
I will discuss Adam Smith, who is known as the father of classical economics. Adam Smith was a Scottish economist and philosopher. In 1776, he published his famous book, The Wealth of Nations, which became the foundation of public finance. His ideas continue to influence many countries, including the Philippines. First is classical economics and pre-enterprise. One of Adam Smith's major concepts is classical economics. He believed that people and businesses should have the freedom to produce, trade, and compete with minimal government intervention. This idea is known as laissez-faire, which meant the government should not interfere too much into business activities. According to Smith, when businesses compete freely, they become more productive, prices become more affordable, and consumers have better choices. Example, kung daghang tindahan ang namaligya og parehas nga product, bag-compete jud sila. Maningkamot jud sila nga mas ubos ilang price ug mas better ang quality para daghang customer ang mupalit sa ila. Next is limited role of government. Although Adam Smith supported free enterprise, he did not believe that government should do nothing. He believed that government should focus only on its essential responsibilities, such as protecting the country through national defense, maintaining peace and justice, building public infrastructure like roads, bridges, and schools, and supervising banks and financial institutions. He believed that government becomes too involved in businesses, it may become inefficient and waste public funds. Example, ang gobyerno mao'y responsible sa pagbuild og mga roads, bridges ug public schools kay kini nga mga services kay para sa tanang katawhan. Next is poor canons of taxation. One of Adam Smith's greatest contribution to public finance is his four canons of taxation. First is equity. Taxes should be fair. Those who earn more should contribute more. For example, ang tawo nga mas dako og sweldo, mas dako pud iyang mabayaran nga tax compared sa mas gamay og income. B. Certainty. The amount, time, and method of paying taxes should be clear to every taxpayer. Example, dapat aware ang mga taxpayer bitaw if pila jud ilang bayran ug when exact date sila dapat mo pay para mas ma-avoid ang confusion o corruption. C. Convenience. Taxes should be easy and convenient to pay. Example, masayo na jud kaayo mo pay og tax karon through online filing og electronic payment system. D. Economy. The cost of collecting taxes should be as low as possible so that the most of the money collected will be used for public services. Example, mas maayo jud if gamay ra ang sweldo for tax collection para mas dako nga budget ang mako-allocate for government services like education o health. Next, balanced budgets and responsible borrowing. Adam Smith believed that the government should manage its finances the same way a family manage its budget. He believed that borrowing should only be done when necessary and that loans should be repaid as soon as possible. He also supported having a balanced budget to avoid excessive debt. Sample, if walay valid og important reason, dili fine magpalabi og utang ang mga government. Mas maayo nga i-manage og tarong ang budget ug i-pay off dayon ang debts quarterly as soon as possible. Historical development. Before Adam Smith, many countries allowed mercantilism where governments control trade and businesses. Adam Smith criticized this system because he believed that too much government controls slow economic growth. His idea introduced classical economics, which promoted free market, competition, efficient taxation, and responsible public finance, relevant to public fiscal administration. Adam Smith's ideas are still relevant in the Philippines today. His principle of taxation can be seen in how the Bureau of International Revenue collects taxes to fund government programs. His idea on responsible budgeting are reflected into preparation of national budget by the Department of Budget and Management. Likewise, the Bangko of Central ng Pilipinas regulates banks to maintain financial stability, which is also consistent with Adam Smith view that government should supervise access to financial system. For example, ang tax nga gi-collect sa BIR kay gi-utilize sa government para sa construction sa school, hospital, roads, ug uban pang essential services para sa tanang Pilipinos. To conclude, Adam Smith made significant contribution to economics and public finance. His ideas on free enterprise, limited government's intervention, pertaxation, and responsible budgeting continue to influence government around the world. Even today, many of his principles are still applied in Philippine public fiscal administration, making his work highly relevant in managing public funds and promoting economic development.
We discuss David Ricardo, Adolf Wagner, ug last is si John Stuart Mill. So, anita mag-una ni David Ricardo. So, David Ricardo, 1772 to 1823, was a British economist and politician. So, na ay major concept and contribution. First is theory of tax burden distribution. So, ani, gi-analyze niya kung unsaon pag-shift sa tax burden between buyers and sellers o kinsa gyud ang moadto sa ultimate incidence. Then, equity and uniformity. Siya ang nagbutang sa conceptual foundation para sa modern progressive tax structures to make sure fair ang pagpaningil og tax based sa economic capacity sa mga tawo. Then, public credit and borrowing. So, ani, gi-expand niya ang perspective sa paghuwa sa gobyerno. Di lang kini basta-basta pampuno sa deficit, kundi usa ka strategic tool para sa economic management. Sa trade law and modern tax reforms, ang mga principles ni Ricardo sa tax incidents kay gi-apply ra gihapon sa pag-structure sa atong income taxes versus indirect taxes. Ang target ani nga magpabilin nga progressive ang income tax samtang balance ang consumption taxes. Ang atong modern fiscal policy sa Pilipinas nagamit jud og sovereign debt and public borrowing sa mga capital project sama aning infrastructure programs like Build Better, More o dili lang purely for emergency coverage. Adolf Wagner, 1835 to 1917, was a German economist and politician, a leading catheter socialist and public finance scholar and advocate of agrarianism. So, nasa major concept and contribution gapon. So, state intervention for wealth redistribution. So, ani, gihatagan niya ang state og active responsibility nga kuhaon or malesen ang wealth inequality gamit ang direct fiscal policy. So, kang Wagner na ay law. So, ani, gi-explain niya nga samtang nag-process ang society og economy niya, mag-expand man jud ng public expenditure o state activities. So, relevant sa Philippine Public Fiscal Administration na ani ang social protection spending. So, ang mga programa sama sa 4Ps ug uban pang targeted conditional cash transfers gikan jud sa Wagnerian logic. Gamiton ang pondo sa bayan para ma-lift up ang mga poor families gikan sa poverty. Ang siging saka sa atong national budget is a clear reflection sa principle ni Wagner nga kung mudako ang society, mas mudako sab ang demand for government spending sa social service, public safety ug health. So adto na sad ta ni John Stuart Mill 1806 to 1873 was a English philosopher, political economist and politician. So na siya major concept and contribution gapon. So first is laissez-faire and minimal intervention. So ani gi-advocate niya ang personal liberty and market independence. Argument niya nga pugsanay nga pagkuha sa tax is may counterpart cost mao nga dapat minimal ra jud ang intervention sa government. Then justify public expenditure. So gi-reconcile niya ang liberalism o public intervention sa pag-ingon nga warranted o valid ra ang paggasto sa gobyerno kung kini make enhance jud sa welfare sa state o maka-provide og essential service nga dili kayang i-deliver sa private market. Ani, gi-recognize sa private sector fully as the main engine of economic life which aligns sa view ni Mill. So, ang Pilipinas nagamit og public-private partnership arrangement para makatukod og mga dagkong infrastructure nga dili ra kayo nabuhat sa atong bureaucracy. Gi-justify niya ang taxation para sa mga important sectors sama sa national defense, basic public education, healthcare o infrastructure, ang lugar kung asa dili gihapon pwedeng pasagdan lang sa private sector market alone. So, ang modern Philippine Public Fiscal Administration is a continuous balancing act between Mill's preference for private initiative and Wagner's imperative for social redistribution. While free enterprise drives market growth, kinahanglan gihapon ang active fiscal policy to address systematic inequality. So, Ricardo insights serve as a reminder nga ang tax policies must be evaluated based sa ilang actual incidents kung kinsa jud ang nag-anto sa bayad and not just by design. Sa Pilipinas, ang grabe ang pagdepende sa indirect consumption taxes kan unintentionally burden lower income household unless i-balance kini sa progressive income taxes and targeted social subsidies.
Let's start by recalling the topic about classical economics thinkers like Adam Smith, David Ricardo, and John Stuart Mill. Silang tanan, they shared one core belief. If we let the free market run on its own, with very little government interference, resources will be used efficiently. Ang tanang gusto magtrabaho, makita gyud og trabaho. And the economy will naturally balance itself out. For them, ang role ng gyud sa government is limited to basic duties. Defending the country, keeping peace and order, running the courts, and building important public projects. So, public finance back then was simply about collecting enough revenue to pay for these needs and always keeping the budget balanced. Walay sobra, walay kulang, and no debts if possible. But then, the Great Depression of the 1930s happened, and it broke all those assumptions. Millions lost their jobs, daghang negosyo ang nagsara, prices crashed, and economy stays stuck in recession for years. Bisan wala man gihapong ni-interfere ang gobyerno. That's when economists realize something very important. The free market does not always fix itself on its own. It naturally goes through cycles, booms and busts, inflation and slow growth, nga usahay lisod kaayo sulbaron kung magulat lang ta sa market. This big crisis forced everyone to rethink what public finance is really for and what the government should actually do. That is where John Maynard Keynes comes in. In 1936, he published his famous book, The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money.
and this completely changed how people saw economics. Keynes said that government cannot just stand by and watch. It has an active, necessary role to manage the economy directly. Let me break down what this means for public finance. Simply lang. First, taxes are not just for collecting money to pay government expenses. Pwede na din ni gamiton to adjust how much people spend, how wealth is shared fairly, and to help or slow down certain parts of the economy. Second, public spending is not just about paying for services like schools or hospitals. Pwede sa gamiton to boost demand for goods, create more jobs, and support sectors nga dili kaya sa private businesses alone. Third, borrowing is not something we should avoid at all costs or just use to fix the budget. Pwede na ni gamiton to add money to economy when it's low, send resources to where they are needed most, and help economy grow again when things get stuck.
So, to continue, most controversial of all Keynes' idea was deficit financing. So, deficit financing is fiscal policy where a government spends more money than it collects in revenue during economic downturns, using borrowed funds to create public jobs and boost overall demand. He also suggested that sometimes it is necessary for the government to spend more than it earns, especially during crisis or hard times. So, here in the Philippines, it is against the long-held rule that government must always balance their budgets no matter what. So, later I will give an example about this. So, John Maynard Keynes also gave us the idea of fiscal policy using government income and spending as a deliberate tool to fix imbalances, stabilize prices, keep people employed, and push the economy back on track. He also made it clear that public finance is not just about accounting, it is about shaping how our whole society functions. So, how or why? Because the money or taxes that the government collects and spends mauni ang gigamit para magpadayon og improve ato ang economy. So, every peso nga gigamit sa mga projects, mga services ug unsa pa, it affects whether it can give job to the people, ma-stabilize ba ang economy, or ma-address ba sa government ang mga issues sa atoang community. So, according to him, public finance is no longer about counting receipts or magbalance of mga numbers, but it is about the opportunity for the people, for the economic growth, and also the progress of our country. So, the money or taxes nga gispend sa government, it shapes how our society works, develops, and survive. So, for you to understand it easier, I'll be giving an example about the today's Philippine government. So, in recent years, especially after the pandemic and even today as we recover, the Philippine government has been spending heavily on building roads, bridges, farm to market path, schools, and health facilities. So, we might ask, where does the money come from? Because we all know that our country has a growing national debt. I think 7 trillion or higher pa ang ato ang utang. And as we notice, the government often spends more than what it collects in taxes. So this is exactly what Keynes talked about. Instead of just trying to balance the books and cut spending when times are hard or na ay crisis, the government chooses to borrow and spend on purpose. Kaya nga naman, because building this project gives job or opportunities to thousands of workers. It also let farmers bring their goods to the market, and it also helps businesses open up and puts money into people's pockets. So when people have more income, they will spend more. In return, it will keep other businesses running and also it grows our economy. So that is Keynesian public finance is about. Using the budget not just to run the government but to lift the whole nation. So for example, kung maghimo ka og business din na short imong capital or um, kuwangan imong investment. So, mag-loan ka sa mga bank para makakuha og kwarta para ipadagan ang imuhang business. And magkadugay, mo grow na imong business, mas stable na, mabayaran ra pud nimo imuhang mga utang. So, even when critics worry about that, according to Keynes, short-term deficit spending can create long-term growth that eventually pays for itself. So that is the whole point of Keynes' idea. So, the effects of John Maynard Keynes are still everywhere today, not just in wealthy nations, but also in developing countries like the Philippines. So, every time we talk about national budget, deficit, spending, economic stimulus, or using taxes to support development, we are building on what Keynes started. Terms like macroeconomics, compensatory financing, and fiscal management are now standard in how governments plan for stability and progress. So, of course, his ideas are still debated. Some critics say his idea gives the government too much control or that too much borrowing can become a burden later on. And others argue that without his framework, economists would have struggled far worse through crises like the Great Depression or the COVID-19 pandemic. But regardless of where you stand, Keynes redefined public finance. Because before his ideas, it was mostly about sustaining the government. And after his ideas, it became about sustaining the economy and also for the people. So, for our conclusion, the evolution of public finance shows how ideas about the government's role change alongside the society's needs, from limited duties in ancient times to the laissez-faire approach of capitalism, and finally to active government intervention under Keynesian economics. So each shift was a response to real-world problems. Classical theory suited early industrial growth, but the Great Depression proved that markets cannot always stabilize themselves. This development remind us that um, public finance is never fixed. It adapts to balance economic progress, social welfare, and stability. For countries like the Philippines, this means we cannot simply copy Western models. We must adapt these lessons to our own context, ensuring fiscal policies truly serve inclusive national development. And that's conclude our discussion. Thank you for listening and have a nice day.